it is to be at home. Now is the perfect time to relax after work. I just wanted to get comfortable, wrap myself in a warm blanket, turn on my favorite TV shows, and devour cookies with milk. What a wonderful evening. But it wasn't meant to be. I was jolted out of my euphoria by an unexpected event. Slowly dragging my steps, I went to the door as a long, piercing ring sounded. I didn't hurry to open the door. Maybe these annoying guests would realize how unnecessary their presence was and leave. All my hopes for this vanished in the next moment when the doorbell rang again. It was longer than the first and was accompanied by polite knocks on the door. Opening the door, I saw a police officer on the doorstep. Immediately, I wondered if I had done something wrong. No, he wasn't there for me. Pointing to the door opposite my apartment, he said that a crime had taken place there today. Specifically, a murder. A single woman, around 50 years old, lived in that apartment. She was very friendly and kind, not nosy or talkative. No, she just could keep a conversation going when needed. Since none of the neighbors were around, they called me as a witness. Taking my ID, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I handed over my documents for them to fill out their forms. They asked me to go to the crime scene. I used to visit this cozy apartment often. For something or just for a neighborly chat. Now it resembled an anthill, with everyone running back and forth, carrying things away, someone writing something, and camera flashes clicking. Amid all this hustle and bustle, she lay in the middle of the room on an old Soviet-era carpet. No, she wasn't covered. Experts were still examining her. They were running sticks over her, probably collecting evidence. They looked at her skin for any injuries. She didn't look frightening. Only the pool of blood around her head was revolting. She lay on her stomach, her head turned towards me. I caught her gaze. Such a detached, glassy gaze. It's hard to imagine that these were once eyes full of joy and life. Her arms were spread out to the sides, lying helplessly on the carpet. I think she didn't resist, or it all happened very suddenly. Since I saw no other injuries, there was just one blow to the head. She wasn't deathly pale. Her skin tone didn't seem different from when she was alive, except for the head injury that caused her death. What gave away her death was her gaze, only her gaze. After gathering all the necessary information, they let me go home. I said that if I remembered anything, I would definitely call. That's probably what everyone says. Back home, philosophical thoughts about life and death began to creep into my head. How insignificant our life is. Here we are living our lives, and in one fine moment, it all ends. That's it, the end. Nothing remains. Just people looking at us and studying us like an exhibit in a museum, and we won't be able to do anything. We will just lie there peacefully, looking at everything happening with our empty, glassy eyes. Many people know about the mystery of the abandoned Hovrinskaya Hospital. I want to tell you about an incident that happened to a group of teenage Satanists who decided to hold a Black Massachusetts at the site of an old church built by the Satanist group Nimoster in the Hovrinskaya Hospital. Here's a brief history. Nimoster was a satanic cult that was wiped out. There's material about it online. Read it if you're interested. They were shot by Alman and the police on suspicion of mass murder of people and children. It's said that one of the cult members betrayed them, but that's not confirmed. After it ended, the entrance to their church and dwellings was blown up and eventually flooded with water. It's claimed that some bodies still lie under the water, which is more than 2 meters deep. In 2008, a group of teenage Satanists decided to hold a Black Massachusetts at the place where the church used to be. When they got there, they realized it was impossible due to the water, so they decided to go up one floor. There were 19 of them in total, 6 girls and the rest were boys. The oldest was 21, and the youngest was 15. Taking with them all the necessary items for their ritual, they went up one floor and ended up in what survivors described as hell. According to their accounts, from the very first moment there, they felt like they were being watched, and they went at night. But, as you know, being in a group is less scary, so he claims that neither their flashlights nor their candles would light as soon as they arrived. There was a constant sound of footsteps and screams coming from all directions. The kids decided it was time to give up Satanism and tried to find the exit, but no one could get their bearings. As you know, Hovrinskaya is full of surprises. In one place, the floor is collapsed. In another, it's missing entirely. A couple of people, scared, ran in different directions, and immediately the rest heard screams, then the splash of water, or just the thud of a falling body. Out of 19, 14 remained. The girls were crying. The boys were trying to light something. Anything. Those with cell phones were horrified to find there was no signal. The silence that followed calmed us a bit, one of the survivors said. But soon, the nightmare began. Out of nowhere, all the flashlights turned on. We started lighting our way, but the further we went, the stronger the feeling of fear grew. Finally, we realized we had reached a dead end with a solid wall in front of us. Just as we were about to turn back, the flashlights went out again, and we were plunged into darkness. Walking by touch was terrifying, but we had no choice. Someone remembered that homeless people definitely lived there and suggested shouting in hopes they would hear us. But no one could shout anymore, as what we saw next made many of us run. Suddenly, about 20 meters from us, a faint light appeared, seemingly coming from the ceiling, but we couldn't tell for sure. Then, a strange shadow appeared, rapidly approaching us. We ran, scattering in different directions. Some immediately fell and died. When the vision disappeared, we began calling out to each other. We found each other. It turned out there were now 10 of us, and the oldest member of the group had died. One girl had broken her arm in a fall. We decided to wait for morning. Sitting against a wall, we just sat in silence as fear gripped us. But the ordeal wasn't over. Soon, voices could be heard, coming from behind the wall where the kids were sitting. Out of fear, they sat silently listening. The words were indistinguishable, and they couldn't understand them. Suddenly, the ceiling next to them collapsed, burying 3 more people under it. We couldn't take it anymore and ran. 7 of us were rushing around in the dark, constantly bumping into each other and hitting walls. Suddenly, the air was pierced by wild laughter, which boded no good. Someone fainted. I ran and stumbled upon a staircase leading up. I started shouting, and 2 people ran to me. We shouted as we climbed higher and higher. Soon the laughter ceased and silence fell. Crying and moaning, we sat on the floor and waited for morning. Only in the morning, after 2 hours of wandering, did we find the exit and immediately reported it to the police. The officers found only 6 bodies. The rest could not be found. This prompted the authorities to block all accessible entrances to the hospital and to place guards at the remaining ones. The boy who survived and told this story didn't become the most religious guy. For a long time, he was afraid to sleep in the dark. That's the story. These facts were kept quiet for a long time, and much is still kept quiet about this place. They say the members of the dead Nimoster cult killed them, or maybe it was just ordinary satanic posturing that doomed those kids. Who knows? I think some of you have been there. But never go to where Nimoster was, because more people have died there than in the entire hospital over all the years it's been standing. Annie quietly cracked open the door to her parents' bedroom. Beside the bed stood two figures. One held a pair of scissors, the other a large black bag. Annie was terrified and involuntarily gasped. The strangers heard the little girl and quickly turned towards her. Where their faces should have been, there was only skin. No eyes, no mouth, just thick black hair on their heads. Annie ran to her room, hid under the blanket, and cried for a long time. She feared that those scary creatures would come for her next. Time passed, and Annie was still alone. She didn't notice when she fell asleep. In the morning, at the kitchen table, Annie asked her mother who had been in the bedroom last night. Her mother was very surprised by the question and said it was just a dream, that no one came to their house at night, and that Annie just had a vivid imagination. Annie tried to protest, wanting to prove that she had seen strange creatures at night, but she didn't get the chance. One of those figures appeared in the doorway between the corridor and the kitchen. The thing brought a finger to where its mouth should have been. Annie screamed and pointed at the stranger. Her mother turned and looked directly at the creature. "Why are you screaming like that?" her mother asked, turning back to her daughter. "There's no one there. Tonight you'll sleep with me and Dad." The creature still stood in the doorway, slowly turned around, and walked away. "Good night," her mother kissed Annie and turned over to the other side. Annie couldn't fall asleep, and it turned out she had good reason. The door creaked and began to open slowly. A minute, two, no one came in. But when Annie looked up at the ceiling, she was horrified. Hanging from the ceiling, as if it were the floor, were the same creatures. One still held the bag, and the other a huge pair of scissors. The one holding the bag jumped down and approached Annie's mother. The other followed. With a sharp motion, it cut off the sleeping woman's head. The same thing happened to her father. The second creature placed the heads in the bag. Annie couldn't breathe and soon lost consciousness. Annie suddenly opened her eyes and remembered the events of the past night. She gathered her courage and turned her head toward her mother. Everything seemed fine. Her mother was peacefully sleeping next to her. Overjoyed, Annie tried to hug and kiss her mother, but her mother's head rolled off and tumbled across the bedroom floor.